Building an engine is something that most people will never do, but most enthusiasts dream of someday diving deep into an engine to build one for big power. Building an engine from the ground up is usually expensive, unnecessary, and impractical. But ours had a blown engine, leaving us with 3 options to fix this Golf R. Option 1 is to buy a used engine. This costs about $6,000. It's straightforward and easy, but you have to worry about how well that engine was maintained. Then there's option 2 is to rebuild our engine with stronger internals and a bigger turbo, taking our engine to a whole new level. Option 3, sell your car for pennies on the dollar for someone who's willing to do option 1 or 2. We are going with option 2, which allows us to take a bunch of awesome parts, make a big power build that's capable of holding up to 700 horsepower, and we get to make this awesome video. Before we can make any magic happen with this engine, we have to deal with the state that it's currently in. And before we tore it down, it sounded like this. What we found was a mixed bag of bad news, but some potential. Scored cylinder walls, a crank bearing with material transferred to it, and a burnt valve meant that this 246,000 mile engine needed to be rebuilt. Now the key to any rebuild is finding a talented machine shop, one with the skill, tools, and experience to make sure that your new parts don't just get chucked into an engine, turning into a very expensive ticking time bomb. That's why we're working with Rick from RF Speed Machine to make sure we do this job properly. In our last video, the engine got machined to prep for us to build. Now I have built engines in the past, so they have been running and they didn't blow up, but I'm not an expert. So I have an expert here with me, Rick, who did the machining, and he's gonna help me build this engine. First thing we need to do is assemble the bottom end of our engine. We have our crankshaft right here and the bottom end of the engine that the crankshaft goes into. This is what the bottom end of an engine looks like without a crankshaft in it, and right here is where all your upper main bearings go. Here are all of our upper main bearings, and as you can see, they are color coded. We've previously explained to get the correct main bearings for your engine, you have to look at the code stamped in your engine, determine the color codes you need, map them to the correct part numbers, and then order them and install them in your engine. Our upper main bearings were all color coded red. So right here you see the tang, it's in the block right here, and we're just gonna start and rotate that in place, apply pressure down, and get it evenly seated in place, and you want to try to flush mount it against the block. We're not going to be oiling the bottom side of the bearing. We will lubricate the face of it once they're ready to install the crank. Remember, you want all the oil on this side and friction on the back side because you don't want this bearing slipping inside of this area. This is the old bearing that came out of this cap. It's kind of scored up a little bit. To get it out, you kind of push it around, and obviously if you're putting bearings in or taking out ones you want to reuse, you got to be super careful. Because these are scored and we're replacing them, I'm less worried. Number 1, I'm going to clean this out before I put a new bearing in. But number 2, make sure you keep your orientation of all your main caps in the right order. At the top of this is the order they go in. And all these guys are facing in. There's like this little tab off the side. Inward, inward, center. And those are in the orientation of the block that you can see here. So this is one of the bearings that came out, and again, these bearings were not super bad, but they did have a little bit of material transfer, and then you can see the difference between a new bearing and then that bearing. You don't want to put one in back like this. Even though it's not awful, I would never want to assemble an engine, spend this much time, energy, and money, and put this piece of junk back in the engine. Same as the other one, you gotta line your tang up, and then you can kind of just rock it in place, and then make sure it's properly seated all the way. Yeah, so when it's seated, you should kind of see that it's flush on the top. All right, with our new bearing, I am gonna hit it with a little bit of brake clean like that and a clean paper towel. These are good paper towels so they don't like molt, because you don't wanna get any junk in your bearing. So maybe shop rags or anything that doesn't molt on things. We are gonna lubricate that before we install it, but anything potentially contaminants that are on the bearing before we go forward are already off. We are now ready to drop our crankshaft in, but before we do that, we have to install our piston squirters, because if you don't install these now, you will never be able to do it. There really isn't anything that's gonna mess with the orientation of this, but you do need to make sure that when the piston goes down the cylinder, it clears. So you're gonna wanna kind of face this towards the center of this circle in your cylinder bore. Torque spec on these is 27 Newton meters. Now we're gonna lubricate our bearings, and you can kind of go a little bit overboard if you feel like There's almost no way you can put too much lubrication, but you do not want to go together dry. You will ruin your brand new bearings and the engine you just spent so many thousands of dollars rebuilding. Another thing that has to happen before the crank goes in is thrust bearings. Now these go in between the side of the crank and they keep the crank from shifting side to side like that. Now if you look at this part, you can see there's a groove here and here, and on this side, there's no groove, it's flat. The flat side goes against the engine block and the groove side goes outwards, so that it can make sure you can get oil down in between this mating surface so the crank doesn't end up wearing on this and have metal-to-metal contact. So if you put these in backwards, you'll probably nuke them. Drop our crank in place. We're gonna be super careful about how we do this because we don't want our thrust washers to fall out. I don't wanna pinch my fingies. Now, we're ready to put our main caps on. Previously, Rick measured our engine to check the bearing clearance of the main bearing against the crankshaft. Because you should be an insane person about assembly, we are gonna be double checking our clearances with Plastigauge to make sure, double, triple, quadruple check to make sure that we have good clearances before we fully assemble the engine. All right, so this is our Plastigauge. We're gonna cut it the width of a bearing so we can drop them in place. So you can see, I'm gonna cut it right here. Now what we're gonna do with our Plastigauge is set it right on top of our crank right here. I'm gonna try to make it as square as possible. And then we're gonna do the same thing for each journal of the crankshaft. Okay, to install these, you kind of drop them in place, thread your bolts down, and then you can tap them the rest of the way with the hammer. And then these should thread freely when it's down. So I'm just running these down. This is just to bottom them out. And we're gonna put in these cross bolts. There's 6 of them. If you ever heard of like cross bolt mains, that's what this is. Just to show like extra strength because it comes in to support the main from this side here. No torquing, just hit them real quick. We're gonna tighten our crank bolts down. You have to do it in the right order. Starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 65 Newton meters on each one. And what we're doing this for is because our Plastigauge is in there, it's gonna squish that Plastigauge to the correct thickness, and that will tell us what our clearance is on our bearings. Next thing we need to do is a 9-degree turn on all of these. Now you can see they each have a pink mark on them. That's because we used these once before just for checking. These are one-time use bolts. They're okay to check. Rick's perspective is if they haven't been heat cycled, it's okay. I will be getting new ones for the final installation, but this is just for checking. So what we do is at the 12 o'clock position, we put a line. And what that does is allows us to get an orientation to know if we have done our 9-degree turn all the way yet. Well, we were trying to get a tool time lapse, but because this is on an engine stand with wheels, it's rolling around. So that is not happening. Maybe later. Now we're gonna torque the side ones, and that's 20 Newton meters plus 90. 20 Newton meters. And we're gonna do our 90s here as well. So now we're torqued. Now we can take it all back apart and find out what our clearance is. The Plastigauge has left kind of a mark behind of that greenish color, and that's what we're actually measuring the thickness of. This is a chart that's included with your Plastigauge, and each one of these lines you can see determines the gap of your bearing. Now the thickness of this is measured against this to give you an idea of what your actual gap is, and you can see it's slightly thicker than this 0.002, but thinner than the 0.0015. And obviously this is where you get into way too thin if it's spread out that far. So we have roughly 15 and 20 thousandths, probably something like 17 thousandths or something like that. Here is a middle bearing, and you can see the clearance here, 0.0015 is almost perfectly lined up. So we know that's the clearance of this bearing. And I know this feels kind of imprecise, but if you look, we talk about 1/1000ths being 1/3 the thickness of a human hair. So the reason why this is accurate and these lines are accurate is because the squish that happens on this is what you're measuring. It doesn't need to be super precise because you're actually measuring very, very tiny tolerances, which is why Plastigauge actually works okay for most practical uses of things like this. So how do we know that these ranges are actually good? Number one, Rick told us that these tolerances are completely acceptable. Number two, if you look at AI stuff or search through the internet, you're gonna see ranges vary. What I've seen is something like 0.001 to 0.0024 is an acceptable range. If you have too tight of a tolerance, your engine's not gonna spin freely, oil's not gonna get in between. Too loose of a tolerance, you'll have an oil pressure issue because, and this is really important, is main bearing clearance determines minimum oil pressure of your engine. So let me say that again. The clearance of your main bearings, if it's too loose, will mean that your oil pump cannot keep up and you'll have an oil pressure issue, which is why bearing clearance matters. Too tight, bad, because you can't get enough oil for your crank and it'll nuke the bearings. And this is ultimately why I'm super paranoid about this, because the bearing clearance determines basically the health of this engine. So I'm gonna double, triple, quadruple check it to make sure we don't end up blowing up our engine because of carelessness. Now I'm gonna clean off all our plastic gauge off our bearings. You just spray it with a little bit of brake clean and then wipe it off. Make sure your bearing surfaces are perfect when you're done, perfect. Now that we're done doing our measurements, we're actually ready to assemble our engine, and that's what we got our assembly lube for. We're gonna put some assembly lube onto our main journal surface here, and then we're gonna do the same thing on our bearings. You wanna make sure you don't have dirty hands when you do this, by the way. If you don't wanna wear gloves because you're so much of a man that a real mechanic doesn't wear gloves, just put on gloves for this then, because then you can be a fake mechanic for just a minute. At this point, because we're lubed fully, I'm just gonna rotate this crank because before, kind of at each point of this step, you wanna make sure that you have everything actually moving freely. And that way, if something happens and it stops moving freely, you know at which point it stopped moving freely. If you had your oil squirters, if you're worried about them hitting, they shouldn't be even close, but in case they were, this would be a good time to find out. Something that happened during our process is our thrust bearing came out. Well, yeah, you want to make sure before you put the main cap on, your thrust bearings are in place properly. So they only can spin out because without the main cap on, they can move freely. Once the main cap is on, they will not be able to go up and down. So our main cap's going back in, we have our new bolts in, and everything has been lubed up properly. And we're just gonna tighten this to the same order as we went in before. Main caps are in, we got our initial torque down, and we're just checking, and it's spinning great. Now that we're torqued down, we are ready to roll our engine over for pistons and rods. This is a piston, and this is a piston ring. It has 3 rings, one compression ring, another compression ring, and then an oil control ring. As your pistons move up and down in the cylinder, they need to hold the compression of the engine. So you have 2 piston rings up top, a compression ring 1, compression ring 2, and then below that you have an oil control ring. The oil control ring's job is to scrape the oil off the cylinders as the piston moves up and down. Failure to do that results in massively burning oil, which you probably have on your engine. So that's why. With all of the pistons in our engine, you have to check the ring gap on every individual piston ring. Piston ring gap is the distance between each ends of the piston ring, and when it gets installed in your engine, it gets compressed down, leaving you a very small gap, and that's what we're measuring with ring gap. If a piston ring gap is too small, when the engine heats up, it will not allow the ring to expand. This will cause excessive friction in the engine and can cause engine damage. If your ring gap is too large, it will cause excessive blow-by, which means your engine will burn oil, and it can make the engine down on power. What we have laid out here is all the piston rings for a single cylinder. So we're gonna first start by checking the gap of our oil control ring. What we're checking for is just to make sure there's no major overlap. They depict this in the instructions, actually to show what it should look like. And as long as you don't have a massive gap here, this is good. You're only gonna modify this ring if you have a massive overlap between these. Next, we're going with the top and bottom oil control rings. These sandwich around, so they go like this. Now check the gap on them. You put them in your cylinder like so, and we're gonna put them both together. And then Rick has this fancy guide that goes inside of there and now puts them all to the same depth. And you can see that they're all in the cylinders at the same depth. This is a feeler gauge, and what we do with that is you can see these are all different thickness pieces in here. You take them and you stick them in between the ring gap, and then you keep checking them until you have one that's a little snug, and that's how you know what your ring gap is. Now we repeat that same process with both compression rings. They're gonna be next. This chart included with our pistons gives us an idea of the ring gap that should be required depending on the type of engine build that you are doing. When you find a ring that is too tight, you'll bring it over to your ring file and remove material from both sides of your piston ring to get the appropriate ring gap. You're then going to check your ring gaps again, and if they're good, you can file the ends of your rings to clean off any burrs.
So then you take it and you could see like how it butts up, so it's nice and tight. So now I'll re-put this in there, and then I'm gonna recheck my gap to make sure it's where I need it to be. So I was at 17 thousandths, and now I'm at 20, and I was shooting for 20.
We are now ready to install our piston rings. So on our piston rings, it has this diagram. This shows you how to stagger your rings properly. If you don't stagger your rings properly, you're gonna burn oil. As you've noticed with the theme of this, if you screw it up in any way, you're gonna burn oil. There is a proper tool called a piston ring installer. No, that's not right. Piston ring pliers. Spread your piston rings, prevent you from overextending them. We're not using that, but if you aren't a Neanderthal, you can do this without that. You want to spread the ring the minimal amount possible to get down onto your piston. And then we're gonna continue to go down. That's on there. And we're gonna go back to our thing, and we're putting the bottom oil ring in the 8 o'clock position. If you know how to tell time, if you don't, go back to kindergarten. I'm looking at which side is the downside. Rick said it doesn't matter, but he likes them
So look
at the ends?
The ends, yeah.
Oh, the ends, okay.
The ends, like that would be down on the ends.
I see, down on the ends. I was looking at the whole thing, and it just, everyone is up or down. But that would be down, because the ends are facing down. Okay, top oil control ring, 12 o'clock position. It's approaching that 12 o'clock right now, actually. I'm building an engine the same time you are at home. I'm just not drunk. People, they get together with their buddies and like, let's drink a 12 pack and build an engine. What could go wrong?
Let me back this up real quick. So
he said I'm a loser.
You have to get the expander in first, and then you put the rails on it, because if you actually look at it and you feel it, there's a ledge in there, and this sits outside the ledge. See how
I see. So you put the center one in first.
Yes.
Oh,
so
he set me up. He watched me this whole time. Okay.
I was letting you do your thing. You're at.
Set me up. You want to check my work?
I do.
Go ahead, check my work. Go ahead, check my work.
So the biggest thing you want to do is you want to spin it. Make sure everything spins every time. Second one, spin it. Third one, spin it. And then you can double check your clock rotation.
Second compression ring, 6 o'clock. That's what it says. So it says top right on there, so make sure you face that up. Then 6 o'clock. So an IE right between the IE badge. That's where your gap should be. This is the top ring. The chamfer on the top ring faces up. Second ring, the chamfer faces down. So if you don't have a mark, or it doesn't say top, or there's not a indicator, chamfer up on the top ring, chamfer down on the second ring.
You need a magnifying glass?
You think I'm f***ing old? I am old, but I can see it, luckily. Top compression ring, 12 o'clock. Okay, that's it.
I take my wrist pin clip. I'll put the tang where it's going to cross over the hole. I don't want the gap to be in the hole. And then I just kind of push and work it in. You can see that I have the tang in the open part. I'll take this and I just give it a few clicks to make sure that the lock's fully seated. I take a little bit of lube and I'll lube up the bore, both sides. And then I put the wrist pin down. Lube up your small end of your rod. Take your wrist pin, slide it right in. Make sure it's moving, everything's good. A little bit of pressure with your finger. And take a little screwdriver or pick, and then you flick it into side. And then you want to make sure you put a little bit of pressure on it to make sure it's fully seated. Make sure everything's smooth. I usually take a little bit of oil and I'll pour a little bit into the ring grooves, just so that the rings are lubricated so they'll slide. I usually do the top one first because it keeps the spacer from overlapping. And then I'll do the bottom one. I'm just rolling them out. I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm not, prying on them. I put my end gaps in there and I slide it just to make sure it's nice and smooth so there's no burrs on there, so that I know that I deburred it properly. I just roll it in this. And I just check them. They pass. I'll take a little bit of lube while I'm there and I'll lube up my rod bearing. So now that one's ready to go in.
Ready to clean our engine to drop our pistons in. Before we do that, every cylinder has to be perfectly spotless to make sure that there's no contaminants or anything else. So we're hitting it with brake clean, and then we're gonna wipe out every cylinder until every cylinder has no contaminants whatsoever. So you see that's black. So the reason why we're using white paper towel, this is helpful, or any type of material like this, is you can know, okay, I'm not done until there's nothing coming off. It's kind of like, you know, when you do the brown, same thing. I'm not done wiping till the paper is clean. We're now ready to drop our pistons into our engine. Rick is no longer here, so I'm gonna be solo from here on out. During the process, we spun our rings around to make sure they were moving freely, but I have now reclocked all of them to make sure they're in the place that the instructions say they should be. Our next step, now that our cylinders are clean, is to oil all the cylinders just to make sure you got everything lubricated properly, so you can kind of be liberal with that. Clean gloves, clean cylinders, that's what we're going for here. Otherwise you're gonna ruin your holes. Here's our ARP ring compressor, 83 millimeters, because we are overboard engine. The stock size is 82.5. And you're just gonna drop it in just like so. Then you can see this arrow goes towards the timing chain side of the engine. I'm also going to put assembly lube on our bearing here, just like the other ones. That was a little much, but you know, you could be liberal with it. In our crank, we can keep it up high, we can put it down low, whatever you prefer to get it dropped in. This is slowly gonna compress the rings until you pop them in. There you go, it's in. If you are working with a standard ring compressor, the rings can pop out very easily. It's the most frustrating thing, and you can very easily damage a ring if you're not careful. So those things are super nice. We're gonna guide this in place and get it onto our crankshaft, just like that. This tang on the connecting rod bearing should be on the same side as the tang on the other side. And you can see that's right over there. Just drop this in place and then thread these on. These are 11 millimeter 12 points. You almost for sure don't have these, so you'll need them if you're gonna get them.
You'll need them.
You'll need them if you're gonna if you're gonna install these rods in your car. Whatever. We're gonna torque all the connecting rod bolts at the same time later. We're about to put in cylinder 4 piston. The reason why we're doing it now is because the crankshaft is down on cylinder 1 and 4 at the same time. So we're doing 1, then we're doing 4, and then we'll turn the crank and do 2 and 3. So if you get to a point, especially if you're using a different kind of ring compressor where you get a ring pops out, you'll feel it stop where you're like tapping it and it will not continue to go down. And if that happens, you should pull the piston back out. Right now we're turning the engine, just making sure everything moves freely. I got a little more drag than it did before, but make sure everything moves freely. So we are gonna pour a little bit of oil on our rings. This was a Rick advice so that they're properly lubricated going in. All right, we're flipping our engine so we can torque our connecting rod bolts. From our friends at Integrated Engineering have instructions that come with their connecting rods. It has ARP hardware that's included. The torque spec is 50 foot-pounds, and this should be repeated 3 times per bolt. This spec is based off of assembly using ARP supplied lubricant. Now that they're all torqued to 50 foot-pounds, we're gonna go around again for our round 2. Round 3. We did it. All the rods are torqued and we're testing it to feel what it feels like when you're spinning over. Should move freely, nothing binding, consistent the whole way pushing. Feels great, looks great. I love it. Bang, 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 bang. Now we're ready to install our head, and we're gonna be putting these head studs in instead of head bolts. Head bolts are one-time use because they stretch. Head studs are reusable and they also allow more clamping force. So that's what we're installing in our engine. Here's our upper pan. We're ready to install that on our engine. We've cleaned off the engine surface and then we've cleaned off all this surface. RTV is always in these channels, which is a pain to clean and it takes a long time. We didn't show any of that, and so if you're doing yours, you're gonna hate your life. I hated my life when I did it, you're gonna hate your life when you did it. This channel is the one we go in, and this one here. You do not go in this channel here. That's some sort of relief channel, and then there's also this circle right here. Don't go too crazy with your RTV. You want enough that it seals, but not so much that it goops out everywhere. If you goop your RTV out everywhere, you know what's gonna happen? You're gonna end up with RTV clogging your oil pump, and then you're gonna nuke your beautifully built engine. You have, I think it says 5 minutes for it to set. Now you wanna line these bolts up as much as you can, because the last thing you wanna do is pick this thing up and then smear it everywhere. I'm almost surely gonna do that after I just said that to you, but here we go. The one thing they mentioned in the instructions is to make sure the upper oil pan sits flush with the block so that the bell housing of the transmission sits evenly against it. Now we're gonna torque these, and torque spec on these aluminum bolts is 8 Newton meters, which is next to nothing, to be clear. And there is an insane tightening order that I'm gonna be following because there is 18 bolts. So something to be aware of, aluminum bolts, they stretch like absolute crazy. You know, obviously they're gonna stretch a bunch, and we're gonna about to do some more turns that will stretch them more. But the other thing is, you don't wanna go crazy tightening these anyway. These don't hold the engine in place. This is just to hold the upper oil pan on the engine. That's all my 8s. 1 and 2, which is these 2 bolts, I have to do an additional 180. So I'm gonna put my 12 o'clock mark there. 1 and 2, 180. All these and all those, we're gonna go back and forth just like we did in the tightening order. These are 45 degrees, so not a lot. And these are bolts that, aluminum bolts don't do so good in terms of reusing. They will snap off in a heartbeat. Of the many bolts you can reuse in an engine, even one-time use bolts that the manufacturer says, oh, these are one-time use and then you can reuse them, these are not one of them. All these, 90. All right, now we're ready to put an oil pump in our car. This is a brand new factory oil pump. Reason we're putting one in here is because the original one had 246,000 miles on it, and it nuked the engine, which may have been because of an oil pressure issue. So the last thing I'm gonna do is put a high mileage questionable oil pump back in an engine we're putting this much energy and money into. You can find them on shopdap.com. We've also put together a full build list with all the parts you would need for a job like this, so you can find what you need for your engine build, and we will link to it in the description below. We're gonna take our seal for the oil pump pickup, which we're not putting a new pickup in. The oil pump pickup is the same on GTI and R, but the oil pumps themselves are not. So we are reusing the GTI oil pump pickup in our MK7 Golf R oil pump. And the reason why is because if you remember, the Golf R oil pump had metal inside of it. Remember all those metal shavings we had inside there? So I'm not going to put a pickup back in the engine filled with metal. So I get really nervous about things like this, like oil pumps, because I worry about if something doesn't seat properly and then it doesn't have good suction, and then it won't make oil pressure, and then you nuke your brand new engine. Well, when it comes to engines, I am a nervous Nelly. In real life, I'm kind of a send it kind of guy, but when it comes to building engines, I am the nervousest of Nelly is. Okay, we're putting our oil pump in. It has a dowel in there, you sit it in there. The long bolt goes back there. The shorties go here and here. These are the same aluminum bolts that are over here, so same type of stretchy situation. 8 Newton meters on these. That's what 8 Newton meters is. Just let's watch it just from the beginning. Ready? I haven't tightened this at all yet. That's 8 Newton meters. We're going plus 90. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go.
Building engines is so fun.
It's the best, isn't it? Now we're ready to go to the top of our engine, and that's our cylinder head. Remember, the top of this engine has been redone. The valve guides have been replaced on this, and we're gonna flip the head over to work on our valves. Now, during this machining process, the valves and the valve seats were both machined, so they should be matching. But we still need to use lapping compound and lap every one of these 16 valves. What you're doing when you lap it is you put a aggressive material in between the valve and the valve seat, and then you spin it to get them mated perfectly. This ensures that the mating surface between your valve and the head are perfect. Even though they've been machined, still gotta lap them. So to start with our lapping, we have our lapping compound. We're gonna put a couple dabs of our lapping compound on our valve, and then we're going to stick it in its home. I have this suction cup tool. We have a little bit of water so you don't have to spit on it. We're gonna stick that right in the center of our valve, and then lapping, you just rotate it like this. Now what you'll notice is as you do this, the sound changes. And essentially all this lapping compound is like sandpaper. It's like liquid sandpaper, and you're mating these two surfaces together so this valve will have to stay in this hole. This is an interesting tactic of you put like duct tape on the back of your valve and then put a drill on it and then drill it. It definitely will work faster, but I've also heard there are issues with consistency because you're spinning it super fast, that if you get like grit stuck in a specific spot, it will make these like super sharp lines. Some dude made a video that I saw on YouTube about it. It was pretty interesting. So just do it the old fashioned way. Now what you want to do is every once in a while, rotate it to a different area. You clock it maybe like right now it's high pitched, but if you move it, it gets gritty again right away. What we're looking for is consistency all the way around. That's what you're looking for. It should be gray and dull, that's normal, but there should be consistency around the entire valve, that it's gonna be similar the whole way. Same thing you're gonna see on the valve seat itself. We're probably not done quite yet, but you have kind of a consistent pattern around. I think we got a little more work to do. So one easy test that's really helpful for knowing if your valves are properly lapped is a flashlight. So what you can do is shine it inside of your ports, and you can see the light actually physically come through. With the light off, you can see right around this outer edge here, the light is shining through. So clearly if you can see the light, this would not be sealing in the combustion chamber. So alternatively, you can see that if you have valves that are sealing well, this one, that one's not fully installed all the way. This one, you can see there is no light coming from that. This one's completed, installed, everything, no light. That should seal beautifully. Now, once you're completely installed, you also can fill this cylinder area with water. You will need a spark plug in there, and let it sit overnight or over a period of time to verify that there is nothing leaking down. I'm gonna overlap the rest of our valves to get everything prepped and ready to be installed. But frankly, you're not gonna wanna watch me do that because it's boring, and all you just see me doing is just like that for a long time. See you when I'm done. Now we're ready to install one of our valves. First thing we have to do is insert it in the head and then put the valve stem seal on top of it inside the head. So you can see our valve goes in here, and then our valve stem seal sits right on top of here to ensure oil doesn't leak down your valve stem. So we're gonna lubricate the seal. We're also gonna use, there's these like special tools or whatever that you order with valve stem seals. It's on our site if you want to find it. You can see it penetrate through our valve stem seal like that. We can penetrate it. Now I'm just going to stick that on top of our valve guide, and I'm just going to pop it on like so. So now we have our fully lapped valve. We put our assembly lube on it, and then we're just going to kind of lubricate it. We're also going to lubricate up here to make sure when we go through we don't tear that seal. Now once we've gotten here, we can get our valve spring and keepers in place. We are ready to install our IE springs. These are upgraded springs and titanium retainers. Just to give you an idea of how a valve and valve spring works, here is a valve. Here is a valve spring. It slides through like so, and you can see there are slots up top on top of the valve. The keepers stick into the grooves that are on top of the valve. You can see just like there. The seat slides up and they sandwich in place like this. And that is how a valve is held into an engine. Keeps that tension, because it's kind of wedge shaped, inside of that keeper. So the keepers and the valve seat kind of bind together from that tension of the spring, and that's how it's held in the engine. The challenge of this is you got to get those valve keepers in the spring under massive amounts of tension that you're holding with this tool. Take your keeper, install it into your spring, and then drop it in place. If you look down on it, you can see that you can kind of line it up depending on where you're wiggling. What we're gonna do is take our tool, get it in there, and then we're gonna squeeze it to allow the valve stem to stick through. Sounds easy, less easy in actual practical application. Now that we got that under there, we can line up our top portion. I'm gonna check the bottom, make sure I'm not gonna mess anything up, and apply our pressure. Also, I forgot to mention, we have these fancy stand guys that make life a lot easier, because as you can see, if your head isn't floating off the table, you can't just stick the tool in like that. So, you know, I'm not saying you have to get them. I'm just saying if you don't, you're gonna hate your life. So now you can see that this one is compressed, right? So we're showing you only the end because the rest of them you're not gonna be able to see at all. Now usually what people will do is they'll take assembly lube and you'll stick a little bit of assembly lube inside of the keeper, and what that does, it'll allow it to stay in its home. So this is a magnetic screwdriver that's not like super strong. So this is where you have to kind of play with it a little bit. So number one, you got to be in the right orientation. That's number one, most important. And so you can see that is in place. So I'm rotating that keeper around to allow it to be on the opposite side. Same thing on this one. Oh my goodness, that went in just way too smooth. Once you have those lined up and you center your hole over your tapered area, you can slowly release this, but it's gonna have a lot of tension on it. And you wanna make sure you line it up because you don't wanna pop the keepers out. And hopefully, if you did it right, which I did not do it right, I didn't get it seated properly. So when it's in, it should look like this right here. As you see, it's fully flushed, recessed into there. This was not, and the reason why is because either one of the keepers isn't in all the way, or I didn't have it. Oh geez, now it's done. Now I've done it. There we go. This is fully seated down there. The first time I tried to release this, it got kind of cocked. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in the video or not. And so this retainer was stuck underneath one of the keepers, so that it didn't sit in there properly. This could happen, obviously, if one of these was falling out or if it just got stuck underneath, which is, I think, what happened. There's a lot of pressure on all this stuff. If you're not careful when you're getting these in, out, releasing, make sure the keepers are in all the way. Something like a shooting out. This is definitely a you'll shoot your eye out type of situation. To avoid problems like this, you're going to slowly spin back your valve spring compressor tool, which will allow you to seat everything properly with control. 2 valves done, 14 more to go. Big thanks to IE for working with us on this build. They helped us with upgraded pistons, rods, and valve springs. Now we're gonna install our rockers and rollers and lifters. There are different rockers for the intake cam and the exhaust cam. You can see that these are wider on the exhaust cam and narrower on the intake cam. The way these work is there is a lifter in the head and then you have this rocker arm. It just snaps right in. So all you do is take this and you just boop, just like that. Same thing with the other one. Also just stick it in there, boop, just like that. And these are all the same lifter for all the intake and exhaust cams. And the way these go in, really easy, is you just drop them in place. And you wanna make sure that these 2 feet right here go on either side of the valve. So what you'll do is you'll stick it in just like that and it'll sit right on top of there. And the reason why these have different roller widths is because the cams are actually have different lobe widths, so they match up the roller to the camshaft. Our head studs are in, our upper oil pan is on, the oil pump is ready, and the bottom end is fully assembled. Now that our head's complete, we're ready to put these two together. Now, the first thing you need to put a head and an engine together is a head gasket, but luckily for me, I forgot to order one. And I had to reach out to a local friend, Matt, who was able to bring me one from an Audi store that was nearby and absolutely saved my. Now, our mating surface is already clean, number one, because it's a machine, number two, because I cleaned it. And then, because it's clean, we can just drop our head gasket right in place, like so. Next thing you need is a clean surface on the bottom of your head. Again, machine shop, and I already just cleaned this, so this is ready to go. Now, you gotta be careful, because I don't wanna score the block by dropping it on the studs and then messing up my fresh cylinder head. Oh, there we go. Okay, look at that. For the first time in 4 months, this is the closest we've come to an engine and a car, but that's what it looks like right now. It doesn't really look like a car, but this is the closest it's been. Okay, first thing we got is our washers. We're gonna drop one on each of these studs. I'm gonna drop that on me. Ultra torque is an important part of ARP hardware. So you need to lubricate this because it will affect the torque of the actual fastener. I'm putting this paste on the nuts as well because be honest with you, I don't feel like I did a great job of getting it properly spread around all the way. 80 foot-pounds, which is 108 and some change Newton meters. You make sure with head bolts, you always go with your tightening order. Just like the other rod bolts, they want you to go around 3 times. This is time 2. Round 3, height. We've threaded these guys in. The torque spec on this is astonishingly low. It is 4 Newton meters plus 90. So that's a torque spec that's basically finger tight plus 90 degrees. They basically seal this side of the head where it goes to the timing chains go through here. So they seal this part where the timing chains go through. This pile is shrinking, pretty cool. These are the balance shafts. We're about to go balance them in the shafts. It shows this serrated part goes out. We're gonna stick that into our hole. I can't show you this on camera because it's impossible to see. Oh, you know what, we get it, a phone camera. Lights and cameras don't work well together because when you're looking down a dark hole, the camera blocks the ability for you to light the hole. I know you watch videos all the time with holes that are dark that are well lit, but phones have a camera with a light right next to it which allows you to light the hole and actually get shots of things. The tube that we're talking about sits right in between this section and this section and is right butted up against this roller area where this roller area goes into. Balance shaft is weighted, so if you imagine that spins, right? There's a counterweight and the balance shafts spin like this against each other, and you can see they balance the engine out. So balance shafts prevent excessive vibrations in your engine. There's some timing marks there. So they get timed with the timing chains. There's a bearing for this part, and then obviously this part has a race in the block. And so we're gonna make sure we thoroughly lubricate all of these items. Now that's the theme of this entire video, is make sure you lube all your holes. Here we go. There you go, and it's in. And watch, you can see how it's weighted. See how it goes back by itself? So this is what keeps your engine running smoothly, these guys. This is a reverse thread bolt. This is what drives the water pump. We're gonna get our assembly lube on here and on here. This one has no tube because when you put it on, you have to spline this gear in place like that. We're not ready yet though, because we have a bolt here and a bolt here we gotta put on. Put this gear in and you can see it goes in like that. And you got this fat washer and this bolt. We've actually got a new bolt there. We wanna make sure we get a freshie. What they say is to tighten this to 10 Newton meters. That was tightened 10 Newton meters. And then see if it has any play. That's because the little guy that goes behind it is kind of sticks in there and has like a dowel that keeps it in place. And I don't feel any play, so we're going to proceed to 25 Newton meters. 25 Newton meters plus 90 degrees using a rigid wrench. I'm going to show them the most rigid wrench. Rigid wrench, 90 degrees. There we go. While I was finding items for the balance shaft, I found this bag and it had these two little metal guys in it. And what these metal guys are, now you don't know what those are, and at first I didn't either, and then I thought about it. And I said to myself, these look like dowels. If we take a look at this engine, you can see this is a dowel here, and that's a dowel there. We looked back at the footage and saw that our engine, in fact, did not have any dowels. So that is what these are. And so I pulled the head back off, pulled our head gasket off, and we're going to install these dowels. Now you would have to take these out, which makes sense because when you deck the block, these can't be sitting in the way because it can't deck the block. Yeah, you can see, so you see this line here? You can see that was kind of the dirt line of where it was. So it was moving before. I'm questioning whether it's still moving. Now the one thing that Rick mentioned is the dowels. The reason why they're important is because it not only centers the head gasket, but ensures that none of the head gasket material overlaps into your cylinders themselves. If you do, you could cause a problem with obviously a head gasket leaking, misfire, who knows. Okay, so now I am ready to lubricate our studs, put our head back on, and retorque all of our bolts. This is the one benefit of studs, is that they are reusable and they're not stretch bolts. Like if we had factory head bolts, we would have to replace them now. Now this engine originally had 246,000 miles on it. Camshafts on Volkswagen engines, especially the intake cams, are known to have problems. They have a cam adjuster at the end of them, right here, that adjusts timing. I'm not going to put the original cams back in because I'm concerned about that being a problem. So I have a new exhaust cam that you can see here, and then I have a new intake cam, which is from a GTI. As we saw in our previous video where we compared the engines, we believe the GTI one's going to work great, and it's a tiny fraction of the price. So we're going to drop them in. So we're going to lubricate all of our bearing surfaces here. Now you do want to make sure that these journals are all good. Obviously we did that before. And then you want to lubricate on this side and then on the cam cage side before you install it. And this is the intake cam from the GTI. And if you want to buy one, you can buy one at shopdap.com. We also have cam kits for when yours goes bad, you can replace it. But you can see this is the journal here. So I'm going to lubricate them as well on the cams before I drop them in. Never ever want to have any of this stuff be dry. I'm actually going to put this down and then we'll mess with it later. We're going to lube all that before we actually go in with the cam cage anyway. So here are our timing chain layouts. They're layered on the engine. This is the timing chain that goes from the cams to the crank. This is the balance shaft chain. This is the oil pump chain. And you can see here's the tensioner for that chain. This is the tensioner for this chain. Cams are on. We're going to put the cam bridge on so that we can time our engine. First thing we did was lay our cams in place. You want to lay it roughly so that this timing mark is at the top, and you lay the cams roughly where they settle in that position. In this particular one, on the intake cam is about 1 o'clock, and if you look at the exhaust cam, that mark is right around 11. The other thing that's important is that your cylinder 1 needs to be at top dead center. If you don't have this in place, you could end up putting these cams down, bolt them down, and then bend a valve. So don't do that. Cylinder 1 top dead center, and then we'll fine tune it later once the cams are actually bolted down. We also need to lubricate, obviously, our cam bridge. We did that on the head. We're going to do it on the cam bridge. And then we have to put our anaerobic sealant on our head. This is anaerobic flange sealant. So we sell this with a variety of ways. The factory stuff is green. It's really expensive. It's like $100 for the tube. This stuff is much more affordable. And anaerobic sealant doesn't dry. So anaerobic means it dries with outside of the air. Do not put it into these right here, along here, or this one here. These are intentional to allow oil to travel in between these places. So don't fill those in, they're not supposed to be. And so what we're gonna do is fill it in this channel that goes around here. We're gonna fill it around this channel that goes around here, and then the circles that go around the spark plug holes, and then we will be dropping it in place. We did check all the rockers to make sure they're on your springs. Those feet need to be straddling this spring tip, so that's super important. Also, you have only one shot with this, so don't smear this all over the place because you're gonna make an absolute mess and it's not gonna seal properly. And you gotta make sure you keep your cams in place and they don't move on you either. So if you're doing this at home, there's one important thing I forgot to mention before we put that cam gauge on. These, on the exhaust cam, they slide like this. Ow, I pinched my finger. That hurt. Okay, so that hurt quite a bit actually. You will need to make sure these are in the correct orientation before you try to bolt that cam cage down, because if they're not, you will mess up your camshaft. The correct orientation for these is these lobes pushed in and these lobes pushed in like this and like this. And there is a ton of bolts, 22 I believe is the number. So what we're gonna do is kind of walk them down. We're gonna thread them in and then walk them down all together to get this thing in place. This cover has to get walked down slowly. Duncan walked through it and kind of snugged it down. You do it in rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? So he snugged all that up, and now we're gonna be torquing. Torque spec is 8 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. So we're gonna do our 8s first. You also can rotate these camshafts to make sure they move freely as you're doing it. There is a special tool to do that. You probably won't have it, but it just kind of locks into there. You can see how that goes. And so you can kind of just rotate it a little bit back and forth and make sure that your camshaft is actually freely moving. It's gonna be hard to move, and you do not wanna rotate this far, because if you do, it will push down the valves and quick turn, and you can bend your valves that way. So don't do that. We're just moving it back and forth, make sure it's still moving freely. Checking as we bolt this valve cover down. As you're walking it down, you can periodically check things like that. So right here is your anaerobic sealant, and as you can see, it's kind of gooped out over the edge. This is never going to dry. Literally never. Anaerobic means it only dries in the absence of air. So you have to get this wiped off, otherwise it's always gonna be a goopy mess, and it's gonna attract a bunch of dirt, and then it's gonna look absolutely awful. So don't do it, get rid of it. Wipe it off. I'm gonna make a mess first, but you'll get the idea. It'll be nice when I'm done. Now we're gonna do timing chains. Now, because I am not super experienced with doing these, I can do it, but Duncan from our shop is way more experienced than me. So he is gonna show you the correct process on how to time an engine so that it's 100% perfect.
So the first thing we're gonna do is install the balance shaft chain. And there's actually more, but there's 3 gray marks on the chain that you're gonna take note of. And those are gonna go on your 3 dots and then the arrow here.
The 3 dots Duncan's referring to are the balance shaft mark right here, which is painted in white, the other balance shaft mark right here, also painted in white, and then the arrow on the crankshaft right here is on the outermost part of your crank gear. And again, these are all painted white so you can see them better visually.
And then they'll kind of rotate a little bit, and you'll end up with a bunch of slack over here. So then we're gonna install our guides next. I'm just gonna pull some of the slack out so you can get your guide in. And then because I'm OCD, I like to recheck everything to make sure it all still lines up. Because as you put the guides in, you're gonna start taking more and more slack out. So if it jumps, you're gonna have to undo things to get the slack back, to put it back where it should be. Fit this one in, hold your chain where it goes. So you got your last one. Again, just check your marks, make sure everything's good.
Now he's got those chains on, we're ready for this, which is the tensioner bolt. Now, I am a little paranoid when it comes to this stuff, so I like to soak this thing and fill it with oil. So I'm dumping some oil into this cup, and then what we're gonna do is, if you see there's a little hole inside of it, right there. So I'm gonna stick it in there, and then I'm gonna pump it up.
So now we've got tensioner back, we're gonna put it in here. I just like to hold tension on the chain, again, in case it decides to jump off the mark down here, at least we know it's good. All right, so now that we've got everything bolted down, we got the tensioner in, we're gonna torque down our guide bolts first. That's gonna be 20 Newton meters. I just like to go around them again. All right, so now we're gonna move on to torquing our tensioner. That's 85 Newton meters. So now that we've installed our balance shaft chains, we're gonna install our main camshaft timing chain. So you're gonna slip that through here. You're just gonna kind of drape it on and get it around the crankshaft.
The marks we're looking for this time are on each camshaft. There's a dot on each tooth, And then there's a dimple that's cut out that you can also see below the dot. And our lower mark we're looking for is pointing towards the inside of the timing gear, which you can see pictured here. And again, that copper link is going to be attached to that one.
Much like the dark marks on the balance shaft chain, you're going to use the copper marks. There's 3 of those for the main timing chain. So we just rotate the cam back here. This is kind of a pain because there's not a lot of slack. So you just got to kind of work it a little bit at a time. So we'll get the first one lined up. We're going to move to the exhaust camshaft and do the exact same thing. There's another dot, and then you're going to line that up with your copper link. So then what we're lining up down here on the crankshaft is this inner arrow and this copper link here. The front timing guide here, just like that. And then we'll just double check our marks, make sure everything's still lined up. And I like to get all the slack. Be very careful when you do this because it'll make the timing chain jump and the cams will move. I like to get all the slack to this side so you can slide this guide in. So this cam's going to want to snap back.
It wants to lock, yeah. What Duncan's doing is rotating the cam backwards to allow more slack on the chain so we can bolt that guide in place. The concern around it snapping back is because all the tension on the valve springs, if you rotate the cam far enough back, it will make a fuller rotation around, which is a problem. So you have to be careful to not rotate it too far.
Okay, so now we're going to install our top timing guide. That's why you want to leave a little bit of slack here. It makes it easier to get this guide in. And then what we'll do is we'll rotate this back really slow once the tensioner's in. That way nothing jumps. We'll get our tensioner installed here. Probably need Paul to take this tool. Rotate the cam back to get the slack. Yeah, to get the slack over here. But just be very careful because like I said, it'll want to jump. Yep, just like that. Get all the slack out of here because you're not going to have any oil pressure when the engine starts. That way when we pull the tensioner key out, all of the slack will be taken up here. All of our timing marks are good, so we know that there's no chance of it jumping when he first starts the engine.
There is a cam lock tool that you're going to see mentioned in repair manuals about locking down the cams. The guys who are experienced with this don't like that because as you just saw what Duncan did, he had to rotate these back to be able to get the tensioner in place and bolt it in place. So without the cams locked, you have a lot more flexibility to kind of move things around. It becomes very difficult to get all of this lined up and bolted together if these things are locked and you have no flexibility to take the tension off certain places. So what you saw was how a professional does it. Take that for what it is. This tensioner bolt on the back here is a 27 millimeter. So you aren't gonna have one probably, so you will need to make sure before you do this that you get one. This is a tool for the cams. This is what we've been using to move them back and forth. This will make your life a lot easier doing this job.
Now that we have our main timing chain on, we're going to go ahead and torque our guide bolts down to 20 Newton meters, and that's going to be these 3 here. And now that the tensioner's on, we're going to go ahead and do 9 Newton meters for both of these bolts. The last thing to be installed is the oil pump chain, but somebody's installed the oil pump, so you can't get this down in there. And that, my friends, is a problem for somebody else.
That's my problem. So I have to flip our engine over to pull our oil pump that I tightened and torqued on off, and then I'll put the chain on. And I screwed this up, in case you're not aware. And so don't be like me and screw things up. You don't really need to do much. I literally just need to fish it in like that. It's really not much. So the oil pump chain, even though it has this gray link on there, which looks like a timing link, it is not timed. So you're just gonna drop this guy in place like so, and then we can tighten down our oil pump. Back where we are in the South, they call it oil pump. Now we're gonna put our tensioner on our oil pump chain, and that's super easy. All you do is get this guy threaded in place. All right, and we'll show you the torque spec for this on screen. And this is what keeps the tension for your oil pump chain. So all it does is rotate into this little clip right here, and you just push that past, and that's it. That's what keeps your oil pump have tension. Now that we're all timed up and ready, we can now remove this clip on the tensioner. You can see this is loose. We're gonna release this, and it will put the tension on there. Just like that. And we can slide this guy back. And what this does is this little metal clip prevents the tensioner from moving backwards. It becomes like this stopping point. So you want to make sure it's fully in those grooves. You squeeze it, and then it will not go any further back than that. So if you lose oil pressure, it can't allow this to completely detension and you change jump time. So this bolt, just so you're aware, this bolt has exceptionally high torque, and there's another balancer that needs to actually go on here. So we will be torquing this in the car with a new bolt. We're ready to install our lower cover. This is a cover that comes with the seal and then this plug. And then we are gonna line it up just so we can make sure it's correct first, obviously. This is an issue. It hits this solenoid right here. So you have to kind of hook in from the bottom first. So we're just showing that on. We have to cover this with RTV before we install it. But again, before you do RTV stuff, test fit it, make sure it's good, clean all of our surfaces, and then we'll RTV it up. This is our RTV, same stuff we used on the upper oil pan we're using on here. So you don't have a ton of time after you put the RTV on to get it set in place. Again, you don't want to screw this up and smear this everywhere. So I'm going to kind of hook in place here, try to line this all up and not make a mess. We have quite a few torque screws here to thread in place. And I'm just going to run all these down and then we'll torque them. The steel version, which is the ones we have, are 8 Newton meters plus 45. And I know at home you're wondering, like, how do I know which version I have? And I don't know if you know this, but steel is magnetic and aluminum is not magnetic. So just go take a magnet off your refrigerator and see if it sticks to your bolt. That's how you know. Same deal, all of our other ones, we're going 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Now all of the bolts are torqued, we're gonna move up to the top. We're ready for our cam bridge. This goes in between the camshafts. Inside of here is a seal where the cam magnet goes. We're gonna be replacing them. So I'm gonna get in here with a pick and then pop it out and clean out that channel, just like that, just like that. And then I'm gonna lube these seals over here. I'm just putting a tiny dab. That's really way more than I need to have. I just wanna make sure that when we put anything in there, which will be the cam magnet eventually, not yet, but that we're fully lubricated there. These go onto the ends of the cams. Now, they oftentimes can be a little bit tight, so you have to kind of work them on. You gotta be careful, because if there's a lot of tension on this, and you don't wanna just beat them to death onto the car, because you can end up damaging the aluminum. I didn't mention it, but you should lube that. Our cam's already lubed, so you should be good there. And these are 4 Newton meters plus 180. Now we're ready to replace our upper timing cover. This is an aftermarket one, but OE quality. It includes all the gaskets. Because these covers are plastic, they can warp over time, so replacing it is going to be the best bet, and it's most economical because when you factor in these gaskets here, this gasket back here, and the bolts, which also have seals on them, this is actually the most affordable option of how to replace this with a quality part. Found on our site, shopdap.com. Okay, so we're gonna torque these to 9 Newton meters, and then we're done. We're on the bottom side of our engine now, and we have to put our oil baffle on. So this is a windage tray, keeps oil from splashing around inside your engine. It has a seal right here on it, and we've replaced that seal and lubed it. And this is all we need to do is literally drop this in place, and we'll pop that seal in. Okay, just kidding. We forgot to mention there is a bolt right here in the center that keeps it from falling out. Now we're gonna put our steel oil pan on. The original pan is plastic, this one's steel. We're gonna slide this sensor on. Boop. We have a new seal on this, by the way. You're gonna wanna put that on. When you're dealing with these, what you should do is kind of tighten around in a circular pattern as you walk them down and torque them. We want the best adhesion possible. Same RTV we use on the upper pan and the front timing cover we're gonna be using here. This is, I believe, the last thing we're RTVing. So I've not done a good job with this. I would like to have done a better job, but here we are. You only got one shot, one opportunity to not make a disaster of this. We've already cleaned our engine mating surface, so I've already done it. You should too. Okay. I did it good. Don't judge me. This one is a little bit off. So that's not exactly where I wanted it to be, but overall, pretty good. It's 20 bolts to install. You can buy this oil pan kit at shopdap.com. You can install your own bolts. I don't want to install my bolts. I'm definitely not coming to install your bolts. Oh, by the way, if you do an oil change or an oil pan retrofit on one of these Gen 3 engines, you need these bolts because they're shorter. The ones that go in your factory plastic pan are about twice the length. Too long, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if it's too long for the hole, it will hit the bottom and then it won't go all the way in. And torque spec on these bolts is 8 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. So we'll do our 8s and then we'll go around and do our 45s. This is our spool valve. They go into our camshafts. You need updated ones to go with your updated cams. They are reverse threads. So lefty is tighty and righty is loosey. So we're gonna do that. And then we got a special tool that actually goes into the cams and we tighten that in place. We're gonna install both these and we're gonna torque them. And here is our torque spec. Our cam magnets are now ready to go in. I'm gonna put some assembly lube around the outside of these to make sure that our fresh seals that we just got on go in there smoothly. Got a little crazy with the assembly lube on this one. Put our first cam magnet in, the second one's going in, and again, because we have new seals, you wanna make sure you kind of roll it in with our lubricated side actually getting in there. These bolts are also one-time use. These are aluminum. We'll put those torque specs on screen right now. Here we go, PCV valves going on. This is the old gasket. Just to clean out our holes. I'm struggling right now. Clearly, I'm having a struggle fest. Here's our new gasket, found at shopdap.com. I don't know if you've noticed the trend. All the items in this video can be found at shopdap.com, all of them. I'm just making sure the seal gets a good mating surface against the head. And there we go.
And this is the part where we stop torquing things?
This is, oh, well, I'm done torquing things now. This is full send from here on out. You see this N80 valve, you think I'm replacing that? Absolutely not.
Why, because it looks so good?
It looks so nice, that's why. I couldn't possibly imagine anything else other than that. You always risk messing up this clamp and like snapping this nipple off, and so unless you really need to, it's kind of not worth it. We're gonna get to work on our valve cover, completing everything. This is just a plug that goes in your head, and it just literally just snaps in. That's it. This is a cam sensor, and it goes like that. This is our variable valve solenoid. There's all of them at the back here. They are all the same part. We've lubricated it, and we're gonna drop them in one at a time. Now that we've got them all in, we're gonna put our screws in and tighten them all down. This is the accessory bracket for the engine. It has the oil filter in it, has an oil cooler in it, and you can see oil runs through it and coolant runs through it. We are gonna be replacing this gasket. If I can grab it. I shouldn't be working floating in the air, but I am. But I'm not smart enough to do something different, so here we are. New gasket there, then we should be able to bolt this on the engine. One reason why we're replacing this gasket, obviously we're going to no matter what with any gasket, but this one's especially important because this accessory bracket is something that is not easy to replace once it's in the car. Again, houses the air conditioning compressor, the alternator. It has coolant that runs to it from the water pump over here. So if this leaks, this is about 9 hours to get to this part to replace this gasket. So we will be torquing all of these, and yeah. So 9 hours to replace that means we have at least 9 hours left. Our 20 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. We have our water pump we're installing. This is a factory pump. We normally actually would have done the INA one, but I think when I ordered this, we didn't have that one in stock. That one's a better option. It's more affordable and all that stuff, and it doesn't require you to assemble it like this. And this is probably the only common problem you're gonna see on this engine, other than the fact that this one was nuked. This gear rides on the intermediate shaft here. This is one of the balance shafts. This drives the water pump. This belt drives the water pump here. This is a pain to deal with in the car, but luckily with it on an engine stand, no big deal. So stick it in there like that, and then we just thread this guy in like this. Oh, also it's reverse thread, and I forgot to say that. And I forgot to say that for you, but also for me this time. I forgot to say it for me. Yeah, I forgot. I've always known this to be reverse thread, but in this moment, it escaped my brain hole.
Hey, that's reverse thread.
Thanks. Thanks for that helpful insight. You can't get it past the flange once the pulley's bolted on. You can see, just like this. Okay, this is the water pump. You can see right here, it goes into the engine like this. Right here, this union goes in. On the other side, it goes in right here on the oil cooler. We're using dielectric grease, and you do want to make sure you lubricate all of these seals before you put them in, because if you pinch or roll this seal, this is voted most likely to leak after you've previously installed a new one. So we always pressure test cars because it's super easy to mess that up. Is you gotta go sideways in like this into the, oh, see it came out on me, hold on. Hold up, and then I'm gonna rotate this guy in just like this. Just like that, see? I bet you we put this torque spec on our water pump video. You could check that video for the torque spec. And if you forget to put your knock sensor on like I did, you will have to take your pump back off, so don't forget that. The trick with this, to get it on and then turn the engine over. Get it on these fins, and then just roll the engine over. If your engine stopped while you're rolling it over right now, you've made an error. Turn back now. Something has gone wrong. This is our cover for our belt. You cover your belt to make sure nothing happens to it. Oil filter from the Isle of Man in the house. Oh, this is a mistake, actually.
Why?
Because we're gonna have to take this back off to put the intake manifold on. That's all right, we're just gonna snug it up that way. We're not gonna put it in all the way, but we are gonna just set it in place so nothing falls in our engine. Well, we might have some other things in store that we need to do to the manifold. This is the other cam sensor, part 2. They sense the cams, so they are quite important. They're the most important, as a matter of fact. Your engine can't really run without them. So we dropped our engine onto the pallet so that we could do our rear main seal, and here it is. So first thing we gotta do is we cleaned up this mating surface for the rear main seal. We're gonna now lubricate the end of the crank to make sure our rear main smoothly goes over it, because the last thing you wanna do is go in dry and end up with a situation where the rear main seal leaks. Rear main seals are behind the transmission. So if you fail to do this properly, you will end up having to take the trans out. So this is an L-ring rear main seal. You can find on our site. It comes with this tool. The factory one is also an option. This one's much more affordable. If you're doing a factory one, you need the special tool to get it over the crankshaft properly. It like steps it up properly and spreads it because it's a dual layer rear main. Long story, but bottom line is, if you do the factory one, you need the factory tool. If you do this one, you do not need the tool. I feel like no matter what I do, I'm gonna block you from seeing what I'm doing. Okay, let's put it over here. Yeah, we're RTVing it, kids. Same RTV that you've used for everything else. I've seen people goop it up so much it gets into the rear main seal. And like on the crank, I remember we had somebody who had a rear main leak, and we looked inside and it was gooped all over the crank because they caked so much RTV inside. We are going to get it over top, and again, that tool perfectly sits on there, and we should be able to just walk it straight past it. Just like that, beautiful. Look at that. Also, fun fact, if you damage your upper oil pan, you can't replace it without taking the trans off, because the rear main seal bolts go through it right in the bottom here. So that's a real cool fact, isn't it? We're torquing our rear main seal bolts 9 Newton meters, and you gotta cross tighten them. This is a dipstick tube for this car. Most people are not familiar with how dipstick tubes work, but all they do is go into the oil pan. So when you're measuring your oil level, it's a specific set level in your oil pan itself. And just pop this guy in. And if you see, actually, this car doesn't have a dipstick. A lot of Audis don't have dipstick tubes because you're supposed to measure through the interface in the car. Now the bottom end engine build is complete. Big thanks to IE for all the parts that we're doing on the internals of this engine. They're gonna make this thing so strong. The outside is not complete, but in our next video, we're gonna have our big turbo laid out, ready to be installed in the car, and this ready to go into the car.